The appeals that usually generate the most calls are where the victims are very vulnerable. People who wouldn't normally come forward to help the police feel moved to do so.
Our next case is a prime example. It concerns a career criminal, Johnny Doran, among whose many victims were Kenneth and Flora Pritchard.
Thank you.
For Ken and Flora, it was a normal day. Flora had been out to the shops, she'd put a bet on at the bookies for Ken, and she'd come back home and made Ken some lunch, a sandwich. And actually, when the doorbell rang, they were watching the racing on the television.
They're under starters' orders. They're off.
Mile and a quarter in front of them. Junique perhaps a little bit slower than the others to stride away. Roger and Martin taking a fierce hold early on. Cackling Silver towards the stand side.
You from the council?
Yeah, I've come about the dam.
Well, I never looked to see whether he'd got a badge on, you know. It was all on the spur of the moment. I says, oh, come in. Come in.
The distraction burglary was carried out by two men. The taller one left the door slightly ajar so the smaller man and the leader of the gang, Johnny Doran, could slip in unnoticed.
Hid some of the things out the cupboard.
I started getting a few things out of the cupboard, and he went to a cupboard on the wall, and as soon as he touched this tin, I said to him, "You're not a council worker." Ken, we're being burgled.
The taller of the two offenders set about Ken and pushed him around and slapped him. Ken was trying to protect Flora.
Johnny Doran collected the money from his accomplice, then searched the flat for more while the taller man stayed in the living room.
Flora managed to get to the window and tried to scream out of the window, and that really upset the two of them.
He kept me in my chair. I was trying to get out all the while because he told me to keep quiet, and I wouldn't. He said, "You're going to keep quiet?" I said, "No, I'm not." I went parched, you know, my lips, and I said, "Oh, I want a drink." And I thought, oh, perhaps if I can get out this chair, you know, and go in the kitchen, I could make a dash like for the door.
I want a drink of water.
He fetched the water, this one, and he got his hand covered.
Can you give me £20?
No, I can't. You've got it all.
The second offender made a search of all the rooms in the flat, and then he emerged from the bathroom and started threatening Flora, and in fact he threatened to gag her.
He bought a cloth, and you know, to put over my mouth. So I struggled with it so that it wouldn't go on my mouth. And then the other one, he got a pink cloth in his hand, I'm sure it was pink. He said to me, "Shall I wipe your face?" I said, "Don't you touch me."
On most of the attacks, the violence was not directly connected with the stealing. Many times the money had already been stolen, but the victim was attacked and beaten, only for a bloodlust.
Oh, leave me alone!
He stood up in front of me with these four legs facing me, and I did go quiet then. And I thought, oh dear, what's he going to do to me?
Say goodbye to her, Ken.
Having stolen cash from all over the flat, suddenly they ran out of the living room. Ken and Flora weren't aware that they'd actually taken their keys, and they locked them in on the way out and disappeared.
And then Ken says, "Found the police, Flo." And I found the police, and when I turned round, I'd heard this bump, you know. And I saw Ken. He was on his knees, in between the table and the chair, and his head was resting by the wall, you know. So I pulled his head away from the wall, and I said, "Ken, are you all right?" I said it twice, and he didn't answer. And then the police came, and the paramedics, and the policeman took me over to a neighbour and made me a mug of tea. And then a policewoman came in to me. I says, "No." I says, "It's not true." I says, "Oh dear, what am I going to do without him?"
One of the early thrusts of the investigation was to identify the other attacks that this team of men were responsible for. And that is simply a question of networking, by going back through records locally, then regionally, and then at a national level. It's the signature behaviours in attacks like this, the things that the offenders do and say, that give the game away, that enable us to draw up a picture, a map of all the offences they've committed. We discovered that this team used a number of techniques. 2 or 3 of the victims certainly were followed home. They were simply seen in the street, probably presented themselves as frail individuals, and were followed to their door. We investigated 20 or more robberies, and they all took place in the Midlands: Warwickshire, Leicestershire, Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire, the West Midlands itself.
The team would concentrate on one area, carry out a series of attacks, then move on to a fresh location. By using a criminal profiler and studying their signature behaviour, the police came to the conclusion the men responsible were travellers.
Traditionally, it's been very difficult for the police to penetrate the travelling community and get assistance in investigations like this. We felt the best way, probably the only way, to get a meaningful response from the travelling community was to approach Crimewatch, so that we could broadcast, and those individuals within the travelling community that wanted to give assistance could contact the police discreetly.
The thing is, Clive, about these 2 men, they're not just cruel, they're cowards, aren't they? And you think they might have committed, what, as many as 9 similar burglaries? Johnny Doran was named by 4 different travellers, but now the police had to find him.
We had to develop a detailed family tree of the Doran family to begin to have an understanding of where he might be. We had to research the migratory patterns of the travelling community, and there is some predictability there, and we were confident after the broadcast that they were in the northwest corner of England. That's where we started looking: Manchester and Liverpool. Johnny Doran was born and raised within the travelling community. He was essentially feral, living entirely on his wits and the proceeds of his crimes, and every few months he'd move on to avoid detection. And it's quite clear that when he was a boy, he was recruited by criminals practising at that time this type of offence, and he learned the trade, grew up into an adult and became the team leader, and not only that, developed beyond just stealing and moved into violence.
The police eventually tracked him to Manchester, where he was arrested.
He was a skilled liar, and he spent the first 48 hours in police custody actually trying to convince us he was somebody else entirely. He's never given us an indication who his accomplice might be, and he showed no remorse for the attacks, either whilst he was being interviewed by detectives or indeed when he was sentenced at court.
I had letters and cards and flowers off strangers, and I had Jason bought a big envelope one day, and he says, "Flo, you got 30 cards here," and it was from some school down the south, and all the children, they were from about 6 and 5 and all ages, and they'd all sent a little card. He was a good husband. 50 years we'd have been married. I think it was made for me, and I was made for him, you know. Because sometimes things are like that, aren't they?